Chapter 1. Eli was in the middle of a case when someone entered his office. He'd been so distracted that he'd forgotten to lock the door. The man with a baseball cap on and wearing all black came in after looking around the hallway. "Are you Detective Eli Raven?" he asked, taking his cap off. "I have information about the case of an art thief. Heard you're involved in it." Eli looked at the man from head to toe as the man moved the cap around in his hands. "I don't talk about my cases," Eli said with a raised brow. "I know you've been working with the police on it," he said and glanced out the window. Eli found it suspicious since only the police knew, but he didn't mind listening to what he had to say. The only conclusion he could make was that this guy had been involved. "I won't ask your name for now, so take your time to explain why you're here." He motioned to the one of the small couches on either side of the coffee table. "In all honesty, I want to save myself. I don't want to go down on someone else's ship," he said, and Eli nodded. "I mean, you have to believe me. There's this guy who wanted to buy a painting. He just doesn't seem real." Eli got more confused than anything else. He leaned back against the couch and joined his hands in his lap. "Okay, I'm listening." The man got out his cell phone out of his pocket to show Eli something. There was an altercation between the seller and the buyer over the painting being fake since it's in circulation for the highest bidder. "So far it sounds believable though," Eli said. He watched the short video. The man's hand a tad shaky. Eli grew cold as he watched the end of the conflict. A creature with a human body covered in thick black fur and a wolf head pinned a man to a wall, its paw similar to a human hand. It had a long tail down to its calves, claws, and fangs. The creature growled at the pinned man's face. And the video ended there. Eli stared at the stranger wide-eyed. "Are you trying to trick me? Is this fabricated?" The man shook his head. "I'm telling you it's real," he said in a harsh whisper. "I only got involved because the seller with the fake painting is an old friend who falsifies paintings. He needed a driver. Then is the guy on the wall who can't even touch the floor your so-called friend?" Eli asked, and the man nodded. "Is your friend alive after dealing with that creature? And how come nothing happened to you?" "Well, the creature is originally a man called Damon," he said, and Eli narrowed his eyes at the absurdity. "There's going to be an art exhibit at the Capitol Museum, and in the basement of the museum a deal will happen at 11 at night. My friend will be there. He asked me to take the painting for an auction again." Eli hummed. "I see, but why are you telling me about your illegal activity? Can simply arrest you right now. Since affluent art buyers are going in hopes of getting their hands on the stolen painting, there's a possibility the same man will be there," he answered. "I'm also going with my friend because he's adamant that someone will try to buy his fake painting. He's in need of money because his son is sick. He's using his painting skills to get a large amount of money as soon as possible, especially since his wife left him not too long ago. It's a long story." All this information had Eli's mind working overtime. He'd heard rumors of large creatures covered in fur with exaggerated amounts of strength, but this was the first time he saw one. Skepticism was still there, but part of him had to believe it. He couldn't find a reason for this man to risk going to prison for a joke on a very real case he knew the details of. "Fine, I believe you. For now. Now when will all this take place?" he asked. The man perked up. "Tonight, Detective Raven." That took Eli by surprise. "Why didn't you come here sooner?" "All this happened yesterday. The wolf man most likely wants to get the painting before anyone can bid on it," the man answered. Eli massaged his temples and sighed. "I'll be there tonight at 10:30 as a bidder. I still have to be sure I'll need to call for backup." He needed to investigate first. The man sitting across from him showed clear relief. "Thank you. I just want to protect myself if something happens. I'm divulging all this information after all," he said, and Eli nodded. "When all this is done, I'll never get involved in things like this. All I want is for this issue to be done with. I assure you that your heads up won't go unnoticed if arrests are made in the near future." "The werewolf part is a bit hard to believe, but we'll see what happens later," Eli said, and the man offered him a slight smile. "Let's meet each other there a few minutes early. Act as though I'm your acquaintance, as if I'm interested in buying the painting." The man stood and put his baseball cap on. I'd give you my number, but I rather not go to prison over this if I can. Even if I know full well I'm admitting to committing a crime, my safety comes first. You and your friend should stay out of sight as much as possible. The buyer from yesterday is most likely going to show up again if he's that adamant on getting the original painting, Eli said and stood as well. Be careful out there. He watched as the man left his office. Eli sat at his desk and crossed his arms on it, putting his hand on his head. He figured that man came to him and not the police because he'd opened this agency only half a year ago. Eli was 23 years old and new at this. It was easy for him to blend in, more so compared to his older colleagues who would sooner be found out by highly experienced criminals. They were around for many years and had set processes for their cases. The way werewolves were rumored about, he'd expected hideous creatures. The one he saw in the video was more like a big fur ball. But he knew such a fur ball could tear him to pieces. Eli checked his watch. Time to close the office. He gathered his cell phone, recorder, his gun, and his laptop. He left the office and locked it behind him. He'd always been someone who preferred working alone, but he helped the police however he could on their cases. A few of them saw Eli as a rookie, but that never bothered him because he knew they were once in his shoes. But this case was different. The experts themselves were having a hard time solving it. After a light dinner alone at a nearby restaurant, Eli got into his car and drove to the Capitol Museum of Treno. It sat almost at the outskirts of the city of Treno, and several auctions and art restorations happened there. What he didn't know was what had been going on at the basement of the museum. Eli parked the car at the back of the dome-like building and walked the rest of the way. There were 20 minutes left until the auction began, and he already saw people in tuxedos and dresses going inside from their expensive cars. He looked up when he approached the main entrance. There'd been an ongoing painting exhibition set to end at midnight from a painter he'd never heard of. Art had never been his thing after all. Eli walked in and found it strange that no one requested him to even buy a ticket. In the exhibit itself, the walls were covered with black and white paintings. Eli spotted the man from earlier coming from a white metal door that blended in with the walls. Eli walked in his direction while looking around. The room was filled with chatter from the growing crowd and ambience music, so no one seemed to notice. The man patted Eli's back to pretend they knew each other. He pointed at a couple of paintings. The painting is ready in the basement. Only a few of the people present will start slowly heading down since not everyone knows about the stolen painting possibly being here. Your friend is risking his life dealing with dangerous criminals, Eli said. He kept his eyes on the people around them. So far no one seemed suspicious. That would be something he'd confirm soon. I tried to convince him to find other ways to pay for his son's bills, but it didn't work, he said. Leaving him here alone is not an option for me. Eli looked over his shoulder discreetly. Is the buyer here? The one from yesterday. He still couldn't really believe the video, but he'd reserve judgment. The rumors of werewolves had been around for years, so he wouldn't end up surprised if they existed. What could surprise him would have been seeing one coming at him in person. Either way, he had his gun on him just in case. If no one involved had been attacked, he hoped he'd get away scot-free as well. The man looked toward the end of the room, and Eli followed his line of sight. A tall man with a broad back and wearing a tuxedo, a drink in his hand with his other hand in his pocket, had been looking at a painting. His back faced them so Eli couldn't see what he looked like. I'll be right down, Eli said and made his way to the man with short slicked black hair. He looked at the next painting, then at the one the tall man had been analyzing. You're looking at it quite intently. The blue-eyed man, who had been referred earlier as Damon by the driver, barely turned his head. He looked at Eli from the corner of his eye. Eli was ignored. The man switched his attention back to the painting in silence. I guess you don't want to be interrupted. Damon kept his attention forward. If that's the case, pointing it out is another interruption. Eli listened to his deep, smooth voice. He couldn't picture him looking like the creature in the video. Moreover, he began to believe he'd been thrown into an ambush. Eli figured he shouldn't go to the basement unless he was sure. He glanced around. Are you here for the stolen painting? This time, Eli had Damon's undivided attention. Chapter 2. Damon looked at Eli for a prolonged moment. How do you know? Eli leaned a tad closer. It's almost time to head over to the basement. I'm wondering if it's a setup. Not if I'm here, Damon said and took a sip from the glass of champagne. Eli realized he was the only one here who could possibly stop this. The issue became calling for backup. Doing that would most likely cause the original painting to become harder to find out there. I'm new to this. I'm here with his parents' money, hoping to start making money for myself. He stopped himself from scowling when Damon almost rolled his eyes as if he'd come across several people with the same story. But that only went to Eli's favor. No one would suspect him. He ignored Damon in return and casually made his way to the basement. He joined the driver, who opened the door for him. Eli went down a flight of stairs and turned his small recorder on in his chest pocket. It also recorded video that was uploaded straight to his laptop in his car as well as to a confidential account online. He reached the bottom step, and there were already 6 people waiting around. He hadn't seen them on the ground floor, so they'd most likely arrived from another entrance. He spotted the same man from the video. Eli watched him on his cell phone as he left through another door. A presence next to Eli made him look up. Damon was here. He hadn't heard one step from him. Eli pretended he didn't see him and walked over to the painting. Just like the picture he'd seen, it was the painting of a woman in a nightgown, leaned against the railing of a balcony, flower pots next to her. The background was a town filled with small houses, all drawn in great detail. The vertical painting extended as long as one of his arms, wide enough for him to carry it under one of his arms. But if Damon saw this painting, he'd most likely figure it out as the same fake one from the day before. Eli noticed Damon coming over to the painting, so he made his way to the other end of the room. He wanted to see the painting from behind the crowd so he could keep everyone in sight. A middle-aged woman in a black suit came from the door off to the side. "Welcome everyone," she said, and the lights were dimmed until the spotlight was only on the painting. Eli watched as the blue-eyed man went closer to the stairs. He noticed Damon looking at everyone in the room, so he kept his attention on the woman talking about the painting. She probably didn't know of the forgery. The auction started, and the 6 people began throwing ridiculous numbers around except for Damon. Eli joined in but didn't say any high numbers so the others could outbid him. He pretended to check his cell phone and gave up on the auction. There was no way to guess who'd been watching him after all. As more bidding occurred, everyone grew increasingly quiet, gradually giving up when it reached 1 million. Only a couple and a man maintained a heated competition. Eli knew such paintings would create a buzz in the crime world, so they could pass them around disguised as assets. Yet no one legitimate would buy them since everyone knew they were stolen, so the bidders were making a big mistake. Damon placed his drink on one of the steps and approached the painting, drawing everyone's attention. "Has no one noticed this painting is forged? Or have none of you bothered to take a closer look at it?" The 6 people switched their attention to the painting and rushed to get closer to it. Eli clenched his jaw when Damon paced to the single door across the room. He hurried after him. Damon had already figured out the painting looked exactly like the one he'd seen before. Eli held the door open and sneaked after the tall man. He followed Damon along a wide, dim hallway of concrete flooring. At the end was a room to the left, a garage door straight ahead. He didn't like how Damon went straight to the room and raised his leg, kicking the door down as if he already knew who was involved again. Damon had come from upstairs, so there was no other hiding spot but this one. Eli pulled his gun from the holster in his tuxedo jacket and ran the rest of the way. He peeked in and saw the same man from the video backing away into the corner of the small office. Damon grabbed the other's shirt collar and lifted him off of the floor. "You're trying to sell that fake painting again." The man panicked, breathing hard. "I have no choice. You don't have to buy it if you don't want to." That ticked Damon off even more, and he grew larger into a werewolf with thick black fur and bright blue eyes. Only his pants remained on. Everything else fell to floor, torn to shreds. Eli nearly dropped his gun. "Let him go," he shouted. He tried his best to stop his hands from shaking. After a deep breath, he focused on his responsibility. The claws and fangs shouldn't scare him from doing his job. The man in the werewolf script took the chance of distraction and kicked the werewolf's gut, but nothing happened. The werewolf regarded the man again, but Eli pointed his gun firmly. "Stop or I'll shoot." He didn't know how to react when the werewolf dropped the man, who staggered and held his throat while coughing. Run and forget about the painting. Think of your son, Eli told the man. The man sneaked away and ran past Eli, almost tripping from shock. Eli was now in a predicament alone with this being. He froze for a moment. When the werewolf took slow steps toward him, his large feet paws with black claws spreading on the floor with each step. Stop. Now, Eli said, but the werewolf didn't stop. You'll give me no choice but to shoot. No different. He knew the werewolf understood him, so it could only be a sign that the werewolf wasn't afraid of being shot. The other man's kick hadn't done anything to him either. Eli couldn't call for backup, and he was alone. The door lay on the floor, destroyed, so he couldn't lock the werewolf inside either. Running became the only solution, but he couldn't. His legs refused to move. This wasn't a human being, so his brain short-circuited at the worst possible moment. He watched with wide eyes as the werewolf put his big warm hand over his the gun and moved it aside. Eli breathed hard, heart pounding, and he couldn't do anything but stare at the wolf's head that almost touched the ceiling of the small office. Damon took the weapon away, and Eli let his arms go limp at his sides. Finally, Eli snapped out of it and noticed the garage door a tad open. His mind grew alert again and he took off running. He rushed through the space under the garage door and hurried toward the left, hoping that was where he'd left his car. Eli came to a stop again when the garage door burst outward. He turned around. As the werewolf approached him, he hated how he shut down. What he needed the most now were his survival instincts to kick in properly. Eli swallowed dry when the werewolf stood one step away from him. Are you going to kill me? He blurted out quietly. You should think twice because I'm a detective. Everyone at the police station knows I'm working on the case of the stolen paintings. It wouldn't be a good idea to kill me. You're a detective? The werewolf asked, and Eli nodded. How did you find out about the auction? Eli didn't answer. Do you know anything about the original painting? I need as much information on the original paintings as possible. Once again, Eli remained quiet. The werewolf leaned down and grabbed Eli, draping him over his broad shoulder. Eli's eyes widened, and his mind worked again, but it was too late. The werewolf crouched and jumped at high speed onto the building across the street. Damon reached into the pocket of his pants and took out his cell phone. Eli struggled to do the same but stopped when Damon jumped onto another building's rooftop. This was the worst time to be afraid of heights. Eli listened to Damon's call while he tried his best not to panic. Damon's arm held his thighs firmly, so he couldn't reach into his pocket. Clean the museum up and meet me at the house in half an hour. Eli didn't do anything as the werewolf carried him somewhere in silence. He needed to escape as soon as he could find a chance. A few minutes later, Damon jumped down and ran around a large house. They reached the backyard and entered the woods. Eli now needed an open space so he could get away and hide. Allowing Damon to take him to a second location was out of the question. They arrived at an open field with a road far away. Eli could barely see his surroundings with the moonlight, only the streetlights far off in the large house. He took the chance the werewolf loosened his grip since he hadn't moved all this way and thrashed until he landed on the tall grass. He took off in the opposite direction. His victory was short-lived. Damon tackled him from behind, and both landed on the grass. Eli turned around underneath the werewolf and used his hands and feet to push him away as much as he could. Even with the support of the ground under him, he barely moved. The werewolf. In a last attempt, Eli swung his fist to punch the werewolf's snout, but Damon got a hold of one wrist then the other and pinned them over Eli's head. Stop it, Damon said firmly. I'm not going to hurt you. I only need. Eli kicked wherever he could reach, but Damon didn't react. Since the werewolf had a human-like body, Eli went for a low blow and swung his foot for the crotch. Damon bent a tad to the impact, his breath getting caught in his throat, and a deep growl came from him. He froze, staring, and quickly tried to release his wrists. He went still when Damon opened his mouth, revealing white fangs, and covered most of Eli's neck. The now steady breath, the fangs pressed, and his large tongue were warm on his neck. Don't kill me, Eli said, panting. He shut his eyes when the werewolf's tongue passed over his neck. He grew even more afraid the werewolf intended to eat him. Instead, Damon pulled away and shifted back into a man within seconds. You're starting to piss me off. Eli stared into Damon's blue eyes as he tried to move again, but Damon as a man was just as strong as his werewolf form. What are you really? Eli asked. Quietly. In their brief silence, the sounds from the chirping of crickets, the cool wind, and a couple of dogs barking in the far distance surrounded them. A werewolf like any other commonly known to humans. Most humans just don't know we truly exist. Before Eli could do anything else, Damon stood while holding one of Eli's wrists and led him away. This time, Eli remained quiet. The only strategy he had now was to escape at the first opening, contact the police, or at least send the recording and video to them. Even if Damon said he didn't intend to hurt him, nothing told Eli to trust those words. Within a few minutes, Damon got tired of how slow they were going and shifted back into a werewolf. He picked Eli up and carried him the rest of the way. They arrived at a large 2-story pastel yellow house with a red rooftop, hiding in the middle of the woods. Someone opened the door before they got to. Did something happen? A man asked. He had similar features to Damon but was a tad shorter. I've been waiting for too long now. Who's this? Damon shifted back. Had a small issue on the way but nothing I couldn't solve. This is a detective working on the stolen paintings case. Eli looked around with hesitation as Damon led him inside. They reached the middle of the wide hallway, and Damon motioned him to sit at the table of the living room. The other man approached Eli and patted his clothes thoroughly. Eli slumped in defeat when the man took his recorder and cell phone. Damon gave the gun to the other man and left the room. Chapter 4. Damon noticed Eli was looking at the paintings when he returned with a file. This is everything I have on my connection with my great-grandfather, Damon said. We've always been a pack and we help each other when needed, especially the elders back in the day. It was Maxwell Caddell's official will. It read that Damon and Silas Caddell would inherit part of his assets and money, while the parents would get another percentage, as well as a portion for the living grandfathers. Werewolves always shared within the pack, even with something small. After all that had happened, Damon hadn't expected Eli to keep him and Silas around. Eli's smaller build compared to Damon made him desire to protect Eli. Yet the more he thought about it, it had mostly been because he wanted to grow closer to him. Eli was too alluring for him not to get interested. Eli took the file and read the first page. Damon stood behind Eli and looked over his shoulder. Can you show me your identification? He asked as he checked the documents. The next couple of pages were Damon's and Silas's birth certificates and the family unit involved in the will. The painter's name was everywhere. The other pages were the assets and the house under the siblings' names, passed on from Maxwell. Damon reached into his wallet and handed his ID to Eli, as well as his driver's license. There are werewolves high into the system, so all of our files are adapted whenever we update them, he said. Besides what he'd told Eli about Maxwell, the coincidence in which Maxwell had passed right before the paintings were stolen had Damon thinking twice. From the beginning he hadn't believed natural causes had been at play. Eli checked them. I guess there's enough proof. You wouldn't need to show all these official papers if your goal was to get the paintings back either way, he said, and Damon nodded. We started off on the wrong foot, but I'm going to help you. As Maxwell Caddell's family member, you'll also be a big help for the case. How so? Damon asked. After all that happened between us, I don't see a reason for you to help us. You might as well call the police to arrest us for kidnapping. I'm going to have you and your brother as my informants, so your identities will be confidential. Eli gazed at the forgery, clearly created with such detail. Yet it didn't compare to the original. My condolences, Damon. Already knew your first name, but I had no idea. Damon was brought back to reality and stared at him. You knew my name all along. Eli nodded. Someone came to me yesterday with a video of you intimidating the forger. You were in your werewolf form, he said, his attention on the artwork. I want to focus on the case. If someone truly murdered Maxwell Caddell, what's important right now is to find out who did it. At least it seems you've been more relaxed. I'm not sure if this will get a different answer, but can you tell me about the case? Damon asked, looking at Eli with expectation. He needed to know as much as possible so he could find some peace for his great-grandfather and their family. There's going to be a possible negotiation at the harbor of Treno for days gone by, Eli said and handed the documents back. I advise you to stop going through underground means if you're to join me, you won't need to worry about getting caught anymore. Anyone would find your involvement suspicious, and you know that. Damon let out a sigh in relief. Got it. I'll drive you back home. The last thing I want is to get in the way of you solving this. I should be at work soon, so I need to open my office. It's my own agency. There's always a change of clothes there just in case. Eli accompanied Damon out of the room. Damon could feel the awkwardness between them. One moment they were against each other and the next they were working together. He drove Eli to his office after giving Eli his things back. They grew silent. Along the way, Damon focused to the road ahead when Eli noticed Damon's brief glances his way every now and then. Upon arriving at the office, Eli exchanged numbers with Damon and went inside. After their goodbyes, before Eli even reached the door to his office, Damon sent him a text message. It read, I apologize and thank you. Damon gazed when Eli smiled a tad while standing at the entrance of the building. He had a feeling Eli still didn't know how to deal with the fact that Damon was a werewolf. That could frighten him, but Damon hoped not as much now that he understood Damon's side and his intentions. With a sigh, Damon drove away from the sidewalk into the busy street. He wanted to spend some time with Eli, but he didn't know how. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. While stopped at a red light, Damon took the call. Is something wrong? Damon asked. There's a small problem. I left my car at the museum. My laptop is inside, so I can't work without it, Eli said with a light chuckle. I'll give you a ride. It's my fault, Damon said. I'm turning the car around. Rustling sounds came from the other end. I'm heading down now, Eli said. Damon looked around and managed to make a U-turn. He hadn't expected his wish to be granted so soon. Damon glanced over and spotted Eli stepped out of the building. Eli hadn't had the chance to get changed out of his tuxedo. Eli got inside and put his seatbelt on. Sorry, I completely forgot about my car. A lot has been going on. Damon drove away. Don't worry about it. The last thing you should be doing is apologize. I was the one who kidnapped you to get information I shouldn't be allowed to have, he said as he looked forward. He took a moment before he spoke again. How did you start working as a detective at such a young age? Mean you look pretty young for a detective. I guess there aren't many 23-year-old investigators out there, Eli said. I got the hang of it pretty quickly, but that doesn't dismiss the fact that I'm still new to this. Hence why I couldn't move when I saw you as a werewolf. I'd say it's completely normal for anyone to freeze at the sight of a werewolf, Damon said with a slight smile. Is it because you have family members working in the same field? A partner? Eli glanced at Damon. My parents aren't anywhere near this field. My mother is a veterinarian and my father is a university professor. They were worried for my safety because it's not an easy job. How did you convince them? I had to tell them my work is mostly investigating cases, not stopping the criminals all that much. They were still worried, but they encouraged me to pursue my dream, Eli said as he looked outside. Well, I used to have a partner for a bit, a police officer. They were promoted and transferred elsewhere, so we decided it'd be best to break up. We were both already so busy after all. Living together would make us live too far from our workplaces. Damon nodded in thought. She was a lucky lady, he said with a tad of curiosity. Eli glanced at Damon a few times. A lucky guy, he said as he looked at Damon. From the corner of his eye, Damon stole a look at Eli, and they locked eyes briefly. Eli switched his attention to outside and crossed his arms. The silence between them became awkward again. Do you know any other place the original paintings might show up? Eli asked, but it didn't sound like a normal transition to another topic. Only the meeting at the harbor you told me about. Since I have a forged painting, any other attempt to sell this one is gone, Damon answered as he made a turn to another street. It seemed Eli had finally noticed the tension. Unless they make another forgery, it'd be a risk, but using the fake painting can distract certain buyers away from the original one, Eli said. If another location existed simultaneously, the news of the original would travel to us. Their intentions are to commit a crime either way, so the authorities could arrest all of them in one go. Damon nodded. We'll see what happens at the harbor. If it doesn't work, we'll use the forged painting. We just have to wait until the other one pops up. They arrived at the museum, and Damon parked in front of Eli's car. Thanks for the ride, Eli said. Before Eli could step out of the car, Damon spoke up. Are you available later to talk about the case? I'd like to make up for what happened and invite you to have dinner with me. Damon answered. I'll think later of other ways to make things right. Eli looked at Damon for a prolonged moment. Sure, I don't mind, he said with a slight smile. Text me the time and address. I'll be off of work by 7. If nothing comes up. Eli arrived at the restaurant after parking the car next to the building. He made his way to the restaurant and opened the glass door. Damon sat at the table near the corner across the room, and Eli walked past the other patrons. A couple of them stole glances at Damon. Eli admitted to himself that Damon was a handsome guy, but no one here knew that he could turn into a human like wolf. Hey, he said to Damon, who offered him a nod and motioned to the chair. Across the table, Eli took a seat and leaned a tad closer. There are people looking your way. I noticed, Damon said with a chuckle. Eli checked the menu. Meet me at the back entrance to the harbor on Saturday. At 11 p.m. We can get a few minutes to speak with everyone involved. Already notified them you'll be there as an informant. Damon's werewolf form being a big, muscular fluffball with black fur and blue eyes helped. He always had a soft spot for dogs after all. That made him wonder if Damon wouldn't like that. Dogs were beautiful animals. He only didn't have one because he had no time or the consistent schedule to take care of one. I will, but is there a chance we can talk about something else now? Damon said, his attention on the menu. Eli tilted his head. I apologize for what happened. My brother is also sorry for what he did. I don't really know how to change that bad first impression, but I'll try. It's fine. We can leave this behind, to be honest. It was only a mixture of a misunderstanding and miscommunication, Eli said. Damon had been apologizing when Eli had already gotten past it. He'd never been someone to dwell on things unless they persisted. That had been the reason why his demeanor toward Damon had changed the moment they cleared everything. But he didn't want to take Damon away from his desire to correct the situation. Damon placed the menu down. This is because I'm not sure I can get past that messy first impression. I want to get to know you, but I would understand if you don't want to, since I'm a werewolf. You were so afraid that you froze at the sight of me. It'd be a lie if I said it didn't scare me to a certain extent. What you have going for you is that I love canines, no offense, Eli said with an awkward chuckle. I take that as a compliment, Damon said. I like being a werewolf. I just know that humans don't usually understand it. The few who do know. Eli noticed the slight sigh of relief from Damon. Why do you ask? I'd like for us to get along in a more intimate way, Damon said. Eli had seen Damon's reactions, even the strangeness of Damon's werewolf side. Damon had been transparent so far. Either that or Eli had only gotten used to paying attention to people's nuances. I want to do the same, he finally said. He liked the way Damon offered him a kind smile. All the tension vanished. The waiter came and they ordered their food. Eli wasn't surprised when Damon ordered meat. He was more of a fish sort of person himself. While they waited for their food, Eli didn't have much else to do. Now things became awkward. I've been curious about something. The way you analyze the painting and how you know if it's forged. I grew up with Maxwell, who taught me quite a lot about art, and I've been a painter from a very young age. Speaking of which, I want to show you my paintings if you have time, Damon said. Eli nodded. Of course. Even if art isn't my thing, I'd like to see what you created, he said. Maybe we can meet after the negotiation at the harbor. There's a lot to do until then. It's a deal, Damon said. A question popped into Eli's mind that got the best of him. Are you eager to show me your art? He asked, and Damon offered him a quick nod. Through another moment of awkward silence, they finally got their food. After dinner, Damon accompanied Eli to his car. They agreed to meet at Damon's house after the dust settled, and Eli already couldn't wait to meet with Damon again. He could tell Damon thought he'd ruined everything after what happened between them, but Eli thought the opposite. He felt Damon's honesty and was willing to allow Damon to become closer. I'll send you my address. You can come over whenever you want, whether it's to see my paintings or to investigate, Damon said, and Eli nodded. They went silent as they looked into each other's eyes for a moment. Damon leaned closer and gave a feather-like kiss to Eli's lips, taking him by surprise. See you at the harbor. Eli watched as Damon walked away. Eli was stunned and only offered Damon a wave of his hand before getting into his own car. On the way back home, his mind was filled with Damon and the kid. Chapter 5. At work, Eli got a call from the police station that there were no new leads. So far, not much else he could do now, especially if the negotiation could turn into a mere distraction. His cell phone vibrated on the desk and he answered. Is everything okay? I got word about the same meetup at the harbor, but I need your help now. Another one of the missing paintings has surfaced, Damon said. I pondered about getting you involved because there's another werewolf in the mix. But if we're going to take down a possible buyer, it's best if you're there, at least as a witness. Of course, and I already told you not to act on your own. It shouldn't matter if it's a werewolf, Eli said immediately. Which painting is it? Damon took a moment to answer, as if to first check if anyone was around him. It's Days Gone By, and it seems it's the original. The wide painting with 8 different sections within the canvas that melted into the 4 seasons. Eli knew that was the hardest painting to find. It had the highest price out of all of Maxwell Cadell's works, appraised by the experts. There used to be a buyer who kept pestering Maxwell to get it, even for $2 million while Maxwell was alive. He never accepted the money, Damon added. If the same person had been involved in stealing and trying to sell the paintings, there was a chance they could crack the case. Eli pondered on the next steps to take. What do you have? Can I stop by your office so we can discuss what I know? Damon's kiss popped into Eli's mind, but he threw the thought away. I'll wait here for you then. I'm in office 17. They ended the call and Eli checked the file on the case to see the picture of Days Gone By. Damon's kiss from last night took over his mind again, and his face heated up. He wondered if Damon would kiss him again. They'd only met 2 days ago. Shaking himself back to reality, Eli checked the list of suspects. Most of them were art thieves who'd been released from various prisons over the decades. He didn't like that a few of them had a history of violence in those crimes. Eli closed the file and put his jacket on to go out. He wanted to get Damon and himself something to drink, so he headed over to the cafe across the street. He had no idea what Damon would like to have, so he got tea for both of them. Sometimes he'd get coffee, but his mind had already been racing enough and he wanted to sleep well at night. Back at the office, Eli set the hot paper cups of tea on the coffee table. A knock on the open door drew Eli's attention. Come in and close the door if you don't mind. I have pictures of a few suspects to see if you can identify any of them. Damon closed the door and approached Eli. I'll help however I can. Is one of these for me? Eli nodded and motioned Damon to sit on the couch, while he took a seat across from him. It's fine. I'm sure you'll remember someone if you see their face. Here. Eli opened the file and showed Damon 7 pictures. Most are convicted criminals and the others are only suspects we don't know much about. Have you seen any of these people, or do you know any of them? Damon took a sip of the tea and looked away from the file and regarded Eli. I'm well aware of the importance of this case, and I appreciate how focused you are on solving it. Before we begin, can we kiss again, even if only once? Eli had been rushing through this for that very reason, out of shyness. He couldn't find it in himself to downright tell Damon yes. Before he could say word, Damon leaned over and rested his hands on the coffee table. Damon glanced at Eli's lips and got even closer, but Eli didn't move. Eli hoped that would send Damon the right hint. He didn't know how to react since he didn't really know Damon. They shared a kiss, Eli's heart pounding. Damon took Eli by surprise as he moved over the table, guiding him backward until his back pressed against the couch. Their tongues clashed and Damon moved between Eli's thighs, his hands on the armrest. As their tongues swirled against each other, their lips locked. Eli became aroused. Only when Eli had to move away to breathe did the kissing end. Thanks, Damon said in a quieter tone than usual and sat back on the couch, clearly looking more than satisfied. He roamed his tongue over his lips. Briefly, Eli froze until Damon said they could continue. Eli pointed at the file in silence and looked away in shyness when Damon chuckled. He noticed Damon's expression growing serious now. Damon rested his finger on one of the pictures of a man in his mid-20s at the entrance of a restaurant. His name was Jason Montgomery on the file. He had dark hair, but it was too dark to see the color of his eyes since it was nighttime in the picture. The angle of his face made him unrecognizable to whoever hadn't seen him in person. I've seen him before while looking for another one of the paintings, but it's not the one who bothered Maxwell to buy a painting. From what I know, he's an art thief, Damon said. When will Days Gone By be negotiated? Eli asked. It must be their first attempt before going to the harbor in 3 days. It's happening this late afternoon, Damon answered. It seems the thieves, buyers and sellers have been trying to hurry the process since there's an open case. For some reason, the meeting will be at the main auditorium of the local university. Unfortunately, I can't tell you who sent me this information, but it's someone from the university. It's solid. Eli hummed. Sounds risky. At an auditorium? Seems like someone at the university might be involved. It's not as if no one knows the painting is stolen, or they simply don't know about it there. We won't know unless we go. Whatever the case, we have to be there as well. It might be a forged painting again or the original one, but all I want is to bring it back to where it belongs, Damon said, scowling. Eli nodded in agreement. He knew that Damon identifying one of the suspects didn't tell him who'd been behind all of it. He needed to know who'd stolen the paintings and distributed them for sale, as well as who'd been the connection between them and those trying to buy them. Why does someone want Maxwell Cadell's paintings that much? There's so much to choose from. Available on the market? Eli asked. That was my great-grandfather's best piece, and he was already quite old, so his paintings would only increase in value, Damon said. Probably having a murdered painter made it even more expensive, but that's something I can't prove. The story behind a piece of art is still important. I'll check the autopsy report tomorrow morning. A trip to the coroner's office might give us answers. They told me there's something they want to discuss after all, Eli said. He stood and put his jacket on. The university was a fair distance away, and he wanted to investigate before the negotiation could begin. He put the file away since he had the pictures and information on his cell phone, and they headed out. You can go in your car, so it seems we're there alone. Damon offered Eli a quick wave of his hand. See you there. They went their separate ways to Galatea University. Upon arriving, Eli entered the campus. He noticed a couple of police cars and an ambulance near one of the departments. As he hurried to the location, he saw Damon joining him from the other end of the parking lot. What happened? Eli asked as he showed his identification to the police. They let him through, Damon accompanying him. Eli stared at the same man Damon had recognized from the pictures. No one said a word, as if they had no idea. What happened? I need an assessment of the situation, Eli said firmly. The perpetrator might still be here. It seems this man just died from some sort of poison, but that's just an initial assumption brought about by the lack of outer injuries. His insides have basically melted, one of the paramedics said. We just got there and had no time at all to put him into the ambulance. He has no ID on him. We have 4 witnesses to interrogate, and a suspect is currently on the run. We already sent out the units to find him, one of the police officers added. Eli looked over at the 2 women and 3 men who stood off to the side. None of them were from the pictures, and they varied in age. He needed to know what this man had been doing on campus and if the negotiation would still take place. They'd arrived early after all. Now, besides Maxwell's possible murder, they had another homicide on their hands. Eli walked into the auditorium with Damon. The 4 people involved went to one of the classrooms with 2 officers into the sculpture department next door. Eli scowled when he saw the painting on a desk, the easel next to it. It's still here, he said as he approached it. Can you check if it's the original? Damon seemed to already know before Eli asked. It's impossible. There's a tree missing in it, he said. The forger most likely worked in a hurry. No wonder this guy was killed here. He tried to sell a bad copy. Eli threw a guess. Could it be the one who wanted Maxwell's painting? But poison is an odd way of handling it. Well, it might be because it's harder to trace it back to someone. An officer approached them. Something happened to another man. He tried to sell a forged painting from Maxwell Cadell. The auction happened at the Capitol Museum of Treno. A few witnesses saw him there and came forward. The man was also poisoned, but in his own home. They didn't correlate it because it could have been something unrelated to the case. Poison again? Was it a man in debt with a sick son in the hospital? Eli stared when she nodded. Thank you for letting me know, he said, and she left. Eli massaged his temples. He had no way to contact the driver. Didn't see that coming, Damon said, his attention on the painting. Eli nodded. Now there's someone killing the forgers. We have to solve this before everything escalates more than it already has, he said. I'm going to interrogate the 4 witnesses to know what happened, but before that I need to take a closer look here. He checked around the desk and noticed some dirt near the easel. The victim didn't have dirt on their shoes. Either that or it was unrelated. He needed to find out whether or not people used the auditorium beforehand. Eli got his cell phone and looked over the same picture of the painting. Indeed, a tree was missing. Yet it didn't make sense to miss such a noticeable part of it. Eli leaned in and saw a pastel yellow house with a red roof in place of the tree. Do you know anything about this house? There's too much detail in it for the forger not to have had the time to draw a tree. As barely there, though. Damon's serious look from the night Eli met him came back. It's my house, he answered, and Eli narrowed his eyes at it. I saw it, but I didn't want to get in the way of you doing your job. The paint dried recently as well, and the frame isn't exactly the same. Don't worry about that. Just be careful where you touch, Eli said. It was the house from a side perspective. But how would the forger know what the side of your house looks like? We can't ask him now, Damon said. Eli stopped his train of thought and regarded Damon. You should call your brother. Check if everything is okay. Damon hurried to make the call and set it on speaker. It rang and then it rang again and again, but Silas didn't pick up. Eli and Damon locked eyes for a moment and Damon called again. It rang once more before Silas finally picked up and they sighed in relief. I was listening to music. The first call fell right when I was about to pick. What's up? Silas asked from the other end. Damon took the time to explain what happened before he asked. Have you ever seen someone strange outside the house? No, but I won't wait here to find out. I'm getting ready to leave now. I'll remain on the call with Silas until he's safely away from the house. Damon said to Eli. I'm going to continue then, Eli said. He looked under the desk and there was nothing, so he checked the easel. It looked new. He took a glove from his pocket and put it on, then crouched and moved the leg of the easel. It was quite loose, so the man had barely started to set up the auction. He went up the stairs between the rows of soft, foldable red chairs. They seemed fine. Nothing drew his attention. Off to the right he spotted one that hadn't been closed. It could have either been from someone who'd been in the room and left in a rush, or the chair itself was broken. He lifted the broken seat and saw a few drops of liquid on the floor. Forensics, he called out. The same officer peeked in. I think I might have found the poison used on the victim. And there's dirt near the desk. Someone else came in with a kit, wearing a hazmat suit. Please stay away from the area, sir. We don't know what it can do. Thank you. Let me know if you find out anything about it, Eli said and went to the windows to check if someone had broken in. Nothing. Damon approached him. Silas is safe. Anything else besides the drops? Eli offered Damon a smile. Good. Well, windows are fine and there's some dirt on the floor there. Could have been someone who wanted to be part of the auction. They probably saw the painting as falsified and killed him, he said. As a last check while everyone else worked, Eli went over to the whiteboard, Damon accompanying him. Nothing wrong with it either. Please send me the details later. Thank you, he said to the forensics team while he handed one of them his glove. He stepped outside with Damon. How are you doing? Fine if you want to go to your brother. I'm fine and Silas is as well. All I want is to solve this, Damon answered. As they made their way to the sculpture department. I almost came to this university, Eli said, drawing Damon's attention. But I don't have a hand or the patience for art. My father loves music and he teaches it in another university, so he wanted me to pursue it and learn from I just don't like art enough to make it into a career. I feel I'm at my best when I solve problems and I'm very analytical. Damon nodded. This does suit you. I'm glad that's the case because I got to meet you except for the first impressions. I wouldn't mind changing that part. That's behind us now. Don't think too much about it. They walked into one of the classrooms and Eli looked at the 4 people, 1 officer on each side. None of them revealed a suspicious demeanor. The leading officer joined them. Hey Eli, things are getting worse on this case. We have to hurry. Hi Francis. I couldn't agree more, Eli said. Can we get the surveillance footage? Already asked them. They must have timed the makeshift auction with a maintenance of the security system, Francis answered. The university took these past couple days to update it. We have someone in charge of figuring out how they found that out. Eli hummed. Francis was a nice guy, but he tended to underestimate how much work Eli could take on as the main investigator of this case. He didn't blame him since he was new in the field. This auction was most likely intended to seem legitimate, he said, and Francis shrugged. Let's begin the interrogation. He watched as one of the police officers led one of the men out of the classroom. He followed them with Damon. Name and age, sir? Francis asked. Thomas Ike. I'm 53, the man answered. I'm a sculpting teacher. No, there aren't any events going on at the auditorium for now. That's why I looked inside and I saw 2 men having an argument over a painting. I already told one of the officers it's a man wearing a black hoodie with his head covered in navy blue jeans. About my height. They must be looking for him right now. Eli nodded. What else did you see? He glanced over at the crowd gathering around the closed perimeter of the crime scene. Thomas pointed at the ground, to where the man was covered with a white sheet. The man in a hoodie ran past me when he saw me, and the other one walked outside and fell right there. He didn't seem to be feeling well, he explained. I'm the one who called for help, and that's when I tried to help him. He could barely speak, but I recall him saying to check the house and saying the name Frederick Baudin before he could no longer speak. And that's all I have. Thank you. Join the others and call over another witness if you don't mind, Eli said, and Thomas walked back inside. The police catching the suspect would possibly make our jobs much easier. But I haven't heard of a Frederick Baudin. That's the forger. We just found out his name. Both victims seem to know each other, and that must be how the forger made the copies, Francis said and sighed. If the runner had nothing to do with the poisonings and it was a mere argument, it'll only make things harder for us. Chapter 6. Who's this? Francis asked. Eli glanced at Damon. He's the informant I told you about. I'll let you know his identity when this is over. Damon, as Maxwell's great-grandson who'd inherited part of Maxwell's assets, would become a suspect in a heartbeat. That was a distraction they couldn't afford to have. It would only hinder in Damon's freedom to search for the paintings. The next witness joined them, a younger man. He looked nervous, unable to make eye contact with them. What's your name and age? Tell us what you saw, Eli said. Aiden. I'm 19. He answered and looked at the bushes by the wall of the building. I saw a hooded man throwing something when I was on my way to the theater club across campus. The gentleman who died only came out of the auditorium a few moments later. I was far away, so I didn't know what to do. Maybe I could have done something. What if I could have saved his life? Eli approached the round bushes with Damon, and they searched around. Meanwhile, Francis spoke with Aiden to assure him it wasn't his fault. Eli spotted a wallet with a chain against the wall and called for the forensics team. One of them came over with a kit. Do you have gloves? He asked, and the young man handed him a pair. Seems too sloppy for a criminal who kills with poison, Damon said as Eli put the latex gloves on. Eli leaned over the bushes, resting his hand against the wall, and reached for the wallet. That's what I thought, he said. When he got it, he looked at Damon, who stole a glance at his ass. Eli raised a brow at Damon, who tightened his lips. Sorry, Damon uttered. Dismissing that, Eli checked inside the wallet. The man in the ID was the same. Who died? I wonder why he felt the need to throw it to such an obvious place. He found this odd. It could either be a distraction or the man had something in his wallet. Some money was still in it. His name was Jason Montgomery, the same name from the files. Eli handed the wallet to the forensics team member and took his gloves off, giving them to him as well. Is that all the information you have? He asked Aiden, who nodded. You can go back inside. Please call over another one of the witnesses. While they waited, Eli regarded Francis. Anything new on the case? All we have is the harbor tomorrow night, Francis answered. I hope the original will be there because people are dying for these paintings. There's a chance such a story behind them will make them increase in value. Those paintings will have to stay at the museum for safety. That is, if the originals are found. Eli didn't say a word about it, but he knew Damon wanted the artwork in his family's possession. This time, a young woman approached them from inside the sculpture department. I already told the police all I saw was the man on the floor when I walked by, she said before they could even ask. I was going to my dorm room because my boyfriend is waiting for me at a restaurant for a dinner date. He's still waiting, and I'm sorry for what happened to the gentleman who passed away, but I'd like to go. Leave your contact information and address with one of the officers in case we need to speak with you again, Francis said. But you need to wait until we interview the last witness. Everyone's stories have to check out. She nodded and made her way back inside. I'll cooperate as much as I can, so I'll call her over right now. Eli hummed as he looked around. There were a lot of pieces to this puzzle, many of them too dark to see, and new ones were bound to pop up at any moment. Francis, is there a way to know how the search for the hooded man is going? Waiting on updates myself, Francis said. I'll call you whether we find him or not. As Eli thanked him, the last witness joined them outside, and he looked more annoyed than anything else. Eli couldn't really muster that much patience, but he knew he could get through it. I'm Connor, 20. I'm late to my class for this. If you don't mind, hurry, so I don't miss the new material for the exam, he said to Francis. Someone is dead right there, Eli said and scowled when the young man clearly didn't care. What did you see? All I know is that I saw him coming out of the auditorium like someone had punched him in the throat. We almost bumped into each other. I heard him saying several times to check the house, and he said the names Silas Cadell and Austin Riley. He answered. Connor spoke quickly and kept checking his watch. I know this is important, but I have to think of my future. My parents will kill him, sorry. Eli and Damon stared at each other for a moment. Is that really what he said? One of the other witnesses only mentioned the name Austin Riley, Damon said. That's because I was the closest to the dying man when that happened. I could barely make out that he said that, more out of caution, as if those people are next, Connor said. He checked his watch again. Oh, and I think he became delusional because he said for them to run from some shadow. Francis narrowed his eyes. Are you sure he said that? Connor nodded and sighed. It can either be a delusional episode or there's someone actually called Shadow out to kill people. He never pointed at the hooded man, though. Instead, he was too busy holding his neck. That's all. Give your contact information to one of the officers inside before you leave, in case we need to speak with you again, Francis said. With the immediate informal interrogation over, Eli went back into the sculpture department. Damon stood closer to him. Eli could smell Damon's musky cologne again. Shadow is the name of the person who pestered Maxwell to sell him the paintings. Is his real name. The problem is that my great-grandfather never told me or Silas what this person looks like, Damon said. It's some guy who wore black suits and red ties each time he went to the house. It's odd because he only showed up at the house when Maxwell was alone, as if he knew when we'd all be out. Eli nodded in thought and regarded Damon. There's a chance the house is being watched. With a house that big, we can go as far as guessing there's another painting. Days gone by is probably the catalyst, he said and crossed his arms. That would mean Maxwell was close enough to him to tell him about it. But that's only an assumption on my part. Damon let out a sigh. We have to look into it. Call Silas about this and check if he's okay. He's not here and the main suspect is on the run, so I'm getting worried, Eli said. He walked into the classroom while Damon stayed behind. With all of the witnesses present, he wanted to see their reactions to each other's answers. Who here thinks one of the witnesses should be turned into a suspect? They glanced at each other for a prolonged moment. Eli didn't see any changes in their demeanor. He regarded them when silence fell in the room. "We're going to check the surveillance soon, so now is the best time to speak," he said. One of them could react differently since the surveillance system was down. Someone could have turned it off on purpose. Again, no one had a word to say, most of them merely shaking their heads. All Eli could think about was how much easier his job would become. One suspect on the run had turned into enough work, let alone interrogating the witnesses and all their friends. At least there were other investigators involved in this big case. "If you remember anything, contact us," Francis told them and motioned toward the exit. "Thank all of you for your cooperation," Eli said as they left. Even at this moment he kept an eye for their reaction, yet there were no changes. Their answers had made sense. Their positions on campus during the incident checked out so far. When he walked out as well, Damon ended his call. "New evidence," Damon said, and Eli stared at him. "Silas hid from me a time. When he met Shadow, he went out but forgot something at home and had to go back. That's when he saw a car, and the man named Shadow talking with Maxwell. He asked how everything was doing when he heard the man asking Maxwell about the painting." Eli grumbled. "Silas must now be a target. He knows what Shadow looks like," he said. Damon nodded, seeming upset that Silas had hidden that from him. "Why didn't he tell you anything?" "Asked him the same. He just said he expected him to be a mere buyer until I told him what one of the witnesses said." Damon checked the time. "It's getting late. We might not find the suspect after sunset. We should go to your house then. There must be a reason why the side of your house is in the painting," Eli said as he made his way to the parking lot. Damon accompanied him. "The painting at the auditorium is going into evidence, and we can't take it with us when the police are around. There's a clear difference from the original, so pretending to sell it wouldn't work anyway. It's another dead end." They got into their cars and Eli followed Damon to the house. Something told him Shadow either knew about the harbor meetup or was involved in it, especially if Damon had heard about it. He didn't want Damon to get involved when people had been dying, but it was obvious Damon would refuse to sit back and do nothing, especially with Silas becoming a target. Chapter 7. When they arrived at the house, they drove in at the same time as Silas. Damon had called his brother while on their way here. He should have known Maxwell wouldn't have been the only target. Yet he still needed to confirm what had happened. Eli stepped out of his car. "Hey." Silas greeted Eli in return with a brief wave of his hand. "I left the house immediately for the very reason that Shadow might be involved," Silas said. "I think it's really strange our home is in a forged painting. We should check it out, but I'm not sure if we have to wait for the police." "I'd say it's fine. I can do that alone, at least for now. We have to be careful," Eli said. He looked at the house and at the spot the house could have been drawn from. He walked across the grass of the front yard, Damon and Silas behind him. Damon clenched his jaw. He couldn't detect the scent of humans, but he still didn't want Eli to lead the way. He didn't want to see Eli in danger. The closer Eli got, the higher he looked at the tree, which was in line with the artwork. He spotted a small dark object between the thicker branches. He got even closer, walking onto the tall grass. Eli froze for a split second and pulled out his gun, pointing it upward. "Hands where I can see them and don't move," he shouted. Damon and Silas joined him in a hurry. Damon scowled when he saw someone. The branches were in the way. They would only be noticed if near the tree. Before he could reach Eli, he stopped himself. He didn't want to interfere with Eli's process. This was Eli's job. The hooded suspect raised his hands. "Please don't shoot." He wore a black hoodie and had a comfortable spot higher into the tree. "I'm coming down. Don't shoot." He held one of the thick branches and dropped to the ground with a thud. With his gun still aiming, Eli took a good look at him. A young man with slanted dark eyes and well-built. "Show me your face." "I'm not a police officer, I'm a detective and I want to ask you a few questions," Eli said. "Do you understand?" He moved his hoodie back, revealing short and straight black hair. "I understand. My name's Kevin. I'm only following orders or my family and I will be killed." "Are you the one who murdered the thief and the forger?" Eli asked, and Kevin cast his head down. After a moment he nodded. "What's your connection with Shadow. He hired me to keep watch. As for the murders, Shadow only told me they were sedatives. I had no idea it killed until I saw that guy struggling to breathe. The forger had a sick son, and his son no longer has his father, Eli said, with a scowl. Kevin fell to his knees on the grass and burst out crying. I'm sorry. Really didn't know. Please believe me, he said. Shadow will have someone do the same to me or to my 2 children. I can't tell you how I did it. Eli eased his aim but quickly pointed firmly. Of all things, why does the painting have the same angle of this house painted on it? Probably because the forger saw the pictures of confirmation I sent to Shadow. They were of Maxwell Cadell alone at home, so Shadow could drop by uninterrupted. Damon scowled at him and spoke up. How is that possible and why? Something didn't add up to him. If that had been the case, the forger had to know Shadow as well. Shadow had wanted the originals. Kevin shook his head. That's something only Shadow can answer. At this point, I'm looking out for myself and my family. Why did Shadow need confirmation? Damon asked. I know the Cadells are a family of werewolves. Shadow only wanted to speak with Maxwell, and dealing with the rest of the family wasn't in his plans at least for now, Kevin answered. Shadow is also a werewolf, hence why I'm too scared to go to the police for help. Silas scowled. What about the poison? It's the same thing that happened with Maxwell Cadell. Shadow gave me different poison for him because he didn't have a reaction to the first one. Kevin said. You used something stronger? Damon asked with a glare, and Kevin offered him a hesitant nod. Kevin continued. Then in my next encounter with Shadow, all he told me was that Maxwell went on vacation, but I saw on the news that he died. They said it happened from old age or something. As a werewolf, my great-grandfather still had many years ahead of him and was very healthy, but you took that away from him, Damon said in frustration. His fists balled up, but he held back from doing anything to the man who'd killed his great-grandfather. You took him from me and my brother, from our family. I apologize, Kevin said, looking down. Eli switched his attention to the house and narrowed his eyes at the window of the second floor. If Maxwell Cadell is dead, what are you doing here? Hiding? He asked, and Kevin nodded. Eli hummed. I don't buy it. Damon. Silas, can you grab him for me? They held each of the Kevin's arms, and Eli patted his pockets. He took some sort of flat vial in the front pocket and took it out. It was dark, and Eli didn't try to find out what the liquid inside looked like. What do you think? Silas asked. He'd barely spoken since their interaction began. Seemed odd, but people could have different reactions depending on the circumstances. I'm guessing he was after you, Eli answered. Kevin, don't try to fool us. I was already here when he left, but I didn't do anything because I know now that this kills people, Kevin said. This time he seemed more nervous. His breathing picked up, and he kept glancing at Damon and Silas. Eli took his cell phone and called Francis. He put it on speaker. We found the suspect and he confessed. I'll send you the address, he said. Damon noticed the panic in Kevin's wide eyes. Even if Kevin tried to look innocent, his obvious fear seemed out of place. Fear of going to prison could be part of it, but someone in his position would want protection. I'll send someone there as soon as we have the address. Be careful, Eli. Francis said from the other end, and they hung up. Eli handed his cell phone to Silas. Can you send your address to this number? Of course. Damon, take over for me, Silas said and held Eli's cell phone. Damon held Kevin's upper arm firmly, keeping him away from Eli. Kevin spoke up again. At least keep my family safe before Shadow knows I got caught. Eli nodded and looked at the house again. It doesn't make sense to me that the forger would add the house to the painting instead of a tree as it should have been, Eli said. Is it truly a clue to Silas's possible death or something else? Did the forger know Shadow that well, and if so, why would Shadow want a forged painting? Damon hummed. Kevin, you're hiding something, aren't you? He asked, and Kevin shook his head. That reaction made him wonder if Kevin wasn't telling them the whole story. Eli switched his attention to the device on the tree. It looked like a tiny square camera. Eli took a cloth from his pocket. He reached up, but he couldn't get it. Hold Kevin for me, Damon said to Silas, who'd already sent the text message to Francis. Damon took Eli's cloth, getting the device for him. Thanks, Eli said and examined it. He held the corner so they could search for fingerprints later. Damon leaned closer and saw the Bluetooth sign blinking red. Eli glared at Kevin. It's still on. The three of them found it suspicious when Kevin kept his mouth shut. Silas returned the cell phone to Eli. Have you been lying to us the whole time, Kevin? He asked, and Kevin shook his head immediately. Is Shadow watching us as we speak? Eli asked this time, and Kevin didn't say a word. Eli called Francis again. Things are getting strange here. How long? Until someone gets here. Wait a second, Francis said. A patrol car is almost there. They're near the location. I'm already on my way. Eli glanced at his watch. If you don't mind, tell them to hurry. We're waiting outside. They ended the call. Kevin, things won't end well for you. The Shadow gets to us first. I won't lie. I believe you didn't poison Silas. Only because you don't have the same substance you used on Maxwell. Damon turned into his werewolf form, earning a stare from Kevin in return. Eli had the same reaction since he hadn't seen it happen during the day. Damon's body grew bulkier, and thick black fur covered his entire body. A soft tail grew out, and his head extended into that of a wolf's. Talk now or all that will be left of you are your clothes before the police gets here. Kevin shook his head quickly. I can't say anything else. Damon gripped Kevin's hoodie and lifted him off of the ground, Silas releasing him. I can just tell the police you panicked, fell from the tree and broke your neck. Do you think I'd feel bad when we all know you're the one who killed my great-grandfather? You're here of all places, so you can't convince me you weren't going to do the same to my brother. How convenient for you that he was alone. Fine, Shadow is watching, Kevin blurted out. I have no children or even a girlfriend right now. It's just that Shadow believes there are more paintings in the house. He thinks Maxwell Cadell should have more of his work hidden somewhere since he started painting from a young age. Tell us about Shadow, Eli said. Kevin glanced at the small camera before answering. Shadow's the one trying to sell forged paintings and keep the originals. The thief only died because he stole the fake painting from the forger, who in turn thought Shadow wanted to keep all the money from their deals. So before anything could happen, the forger drew a house on the painting to make it clearly fake, and Shadow had him killed. Where is he? Eli asked with a scowl. I don't know, Kevin answered, choking on his words when Damon squeezed his shirt collar so he wouldn't lie. All I know is what Shadow looks like in his first name. Nothing else. Shadow is his real first name from what I know. Silas Cadell already saw him before, so he can tell you himself. Eli let out a sigh. It won't be so hard to look up someone called Shadow. Unless he goes by a different name. He watched Damon, who shifted back into his human form. A patrol car careened onto the property.